At the beginning of the final twilight of a once-united civilization, the galaxy lay fractured and broken, a vast expanse of stars and worlds now scattered in silence, echoing with the memories of a lost golden age. Beneath a murky sky, humanity's proud banner, once a symbol of progress and unity, now fluttered in tattered remnants amid the ruins of ancient empires. The dawn that greeted each new day was no longer a beacon of hope, but rather the somber herald of relentless decay, where the promise of light was buried beneath the weight of endless conflict and betrayal. In these forlorn hours, the scattered remnants of mankind struggled to survive amid the chaos of their own making, and the echoes of a grand, unified past resonated faintly like the dying notes of a long-forgotten symphony. In the shadow of colossal ruined metropolises and the desolate plains of abandoned worlds, the people of humanity found themselves isolated, divided by bitter enmities and a creeping sense of despair. Old alliances that once bound them together had dissolved into myriad splintered factions, each driven by desperate ambitions and the instinct to endure. As the remnants of civilization clung to existence in the vast darkness, the very fabric of society unraveled. A tapestry once woven with threads of mutual respect and shared destiny now lay in tatters, its colors faded by the harsh realities of survival. The cosmic winds carried with them whispers of forgotten legends, and the silent lament of a race that had lost its way, leaving behind only the bitter taste of betrayal and regret in the infinite void. Across countless worlds scarred by the ravages of war, the fractured dawn brought not the gentle glow of rebirth, but the harsh glare of a broken future. Cities that once thrived as centers of culture and innovation had become grim fortresses, where hope was a scarce commodity, guarded jealously by those who dared to dream of restoring former glory. In these twilight enclaves, the light of progress flickered uncertainly, overshadowed by the ever-looming spectre of chaos. Among the silent ruins and desolate battlefields, each soul bore the heavy burden of a shattered legacy, a constant reminder that the unity of the past was nothing more than an illusion, lost in the unyielding grip of time and turmoil. Yet amid the pervasive gloom, the fractured dawn was not entirely devoid of meaning. In the quiet moments before the first pale rays of a reluctant sun crept over the horizon, there emerged a subtle, almost imperceptible glimmer of resolve. It was a fragile promise that even in the depths of despair, the embers of hope could be nurtured back to life. This faint light was born on the whispered memories of those who recalled the splendor of a united humanity, a time when the strength of the collective spirit had been enough to challenge the darkness. Their voices, though subdued by the relentless din of conflict, carried the weight of countless generations, each word a testament to a bygone era of valor and unity that once defied the vast emptiness of space. Within the silent cosmos of the fractured dawn, each star flickered like a distant beacon of memory, a reminder that the story of humanity was far from over. The ancient echoes of triumph and tragedy resonated through the void, urging those who still remained to gather the shattered fragments of their past and forge them anew. As the day advanced, the muted chorus of survivors grew into a determined anthem of defiance. With every hesitant step, they embarked on a perilous journey toward reconciliation and redemption, seeking to reclaim the light that had once united them all, and kindle it into an inferno capable of banishing the lingering shadows of despair. And so, as the pale light of day broke through heavy clouds of sorrow, it illuminated not just the ruins of a lost era, but also the resolute faces of those who dared to dream of a future beyond the scars of the past. Every ray of light served as a reminder that even in the most broken of times, the human spirit possessed an uncanny ability to rise. In that tender, transformative moment, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, suspended between the fading memories of what once was and the fragile promise of what might yet be. The dawn of this fractured age had arrived, marred by loss and bitterness, yet carrying within it the potential for renewal, a testament to the enduring resilience of a people who, even in their darkest hour, refused to be forgotten. In the midst of a galaxy consumed by endless strife and the echoes of shattered dreams, a solitary figure emerged from the shadows, bearing the promise of renewal. His arrival was not heralded by fanfare or the clamor of battle, but by the quiet stirrings of hope that resonated in the hearts of those who had long resigned themselves to despair. He moved like a whisper through the ruins of fallen empires, a presence at once enigmatic and commanding, whose very being evoked memories of a lost golden era and hinted at a future ripe for rebirth. This visionary was no mere wanderer, nor a transient spark in the darkness. Instead, he carried an aura of timeless wisdom, as though he had borne witness to humanity's greatest triumphs and its most crushing defeats. His eyes, deep and reflective, seemed to peer into the souls of those he encountered, offering them a glimpse of a destiny unbound by the limitations of the present. Every measured word he spoke, every subtle gesture he made, conveyed the promise of a grand design, a blueprint for reuniting a fractured people and restoring the dignity of a once united civilization. He began his work quietly, in the forgotten corners of shattered cities and among the crumbling vestiges of once proud sanctuaries. In these secluded places, where hope had nearly been extinguished, he gathered a small cadre of followers whose spirits still burned with the desire for unity. Around him, disparate souls, war-weary survivors, disillusioned veterans and curious wanderers, found solace in his vision. They listened, rapt, as he recounted the splendor of an age when humanity thrived in harmony, and they envisioned a future where the embers of that unity could be fanned into a resplendent flame. In secret meetings held beneath the arches of long-forgotten temples and within the dim light of underground refuges, his disciples began to forge bonds stronger than the scattered remnants of their former allegiances. These gatherings were not marked by grand declarations or empty rhetoric. Instead, they were intimate councils, where the visionary laid out his pragmatic plans for rebuilding society. His words resonated deeply, stirring a dormant resolve within each listener, a determination to reclaim what had been lost to the ravages of war and betrayal. Yet the path before him was fraught with peril. The forces of chaos, ever vigilant and hungry for despair, lurked in the shadowed recesses of the galaxy. They sought to exploit every fissure in the fragile unity of mankind, to twist noble aspirations into instruments of subjugation. Aware of these insidious threats, the visionary advanced with cautious determination. His every step was a calculated act of defiance against the encroaching darkness, a deliberate attempt to kindle hope even as the galaxy around him teetered on the brink of oblivion. In moments of solitude, he would gaze upward at the vast tapestry of stars, contemplating the intricate web of fate that bound every lost soul to a common destiny. The silent luminescence of distant suns served as a reminder that even in the deepest void, light could endure. It was this conviction, the unyielding belief that unity was not only possible but imperative, that lent him the strength to challenge the overwhelming forces arrayed against him. His vision was not a naive dream, but a carefully nurtured ambition, built on the painful lessons of a past marred by division and despair. As whispers of his deeds spread through the remnants of human civilization, More began to rally to his cause. Small enclaves of survivors, long isolated and bereft of direction, found in his quiet presence the promise of a renewed future. The visionary's message, simple yet profound, spoke of restoring not just cities and technologies, but the very spirit of a people who had forgotten how to hope. In his eyes burned the conviction that every broken life, every shattered memory, could be mended with the collective will of a united humanity. Thus, with unwavering resolve, he set forth on a mission that would alter the course of history. His journey led him from the shadowed outskirts of devastated worlds to the very heart of long-lost capitals, where he rekindled the passion for unity among the downtrodden and the disillusioned. Each encounter, every earnest conversation, reinforced his belief that even the most fragmented remnants of mankind could be drawn together into a single powerful force for change. In the hushed corridors of time-worn ruins, and beneath the fading light of a broken cosmos, the emergence of this visionary signaled the dawn of a transformative crusade. His influence, subtle yet inexorable, began to weave a new narrative from the scattered threads of a disintegrating legacy. The seeds of unity, sown in the fertile soil of despair, promised to blossom into a future where humanity might once again stand as a single unyielding bastion against the darkness. And so, as the stars bore silent witness to his journey, the visionary pressed on, each step a defiant act of hope, each word a pledge to reclaim the lost glory of mankind. In his steadfast resolve lay the promise of rebirth, a new beginning that would echo across the void and light the way toward a destiny yet to be written. In the aftermath of the visionary's stirring call for unity, a new force was set in motion, one that would embody the strength, resilience, and boundless potential of a once proud humanity. Determined to restore the glory that had been shattered by millennia of strife, the visionary began to forge an army unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Deep within hidden sanctuaries and secret forges, far from prying eyes and the ever-present threat of chaos, he labored to create the legions of the redeemed, superhuman warriors who would rise from the ashes of despair and lead the scattered remnants of mankind toward a new era of order and hope. The process was an alchemical blend of ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science. In cavernous laboratories lit by the flicker of arcane energies and the hum of forgotten machinery, the visionary harnessed genetic manipulation and subtle psychic discipline to transmute ordinary men into living embodiments of perfection. Every warrior was meticulously crafted, their bodies honed to an ideal that defied mortal limitations. Muscles were reinforced, reflexes sharpened, and minds imbued with a resolve as unyielding as the very stars above. These warriors were not created solely for battle. They were meant to be symbols of humanity's resurgence, living testaments to the power of unity and the promise of redemption. Yet the creation of such beings was as much an art as a science. In the hidden depths of his sanctum, the visionary performed intricate rituals and scientific experiments that intertwined his own indomitable will with the raw potential of human nature. With every experiment, he poured forth a fragment of his visionary spirit, ensuring that these warriors would carry not only enhanced strength and resilience, but also an unbreakable loyalty to the cause of rebuilding mankind. Their existence was a sacrifice, for each new soldier was a piece of the visionary's soul, a living promise that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, hope could be reborn. To lead these formidable warriors, the visionary sought out individuals of extraordinary talent and character, creating a pantheon of leaders known as the Primarchs. These figures, each more than mortal, were imbued with qualities carefully chosen to mirror the many facets of humanity's lost greatness. Some embodied the ferocity of battle, their martial prowess shining like a beacon in the chaos of war. Others were strategists, whose keen intellect and calm judgment could turn the tide of even the most desperate conflict. United by blood and a shared destiny, the Primarchs were not merely commanders. They were the living symbols of the visionary's dream, destined to inspire their legions and rally the remnants of mankind under a single banner. The arrival of the legions of the redeemed sent ripples of awe and cautious optimism throughout the shattered worlds. For those who had long suffered in silence amid the ruins of once glorious civilizations, the appearance of these superhuman warriors was nothing short of miraculous. They moved with an almost preternatural grace on the battlefield, their every maneuver a precise dance of strength and strategy. In the heat of combat, their presence lent courage to the downtrodden and ignited a spark of hope in hearts that had nearly forgotten the taste of triumph. Their arrival signaled that the time of despair was drawing to a close, and that a new order, one built on the unyielding resolve of a redeemed humanity, was on the horizon. But for all the hope they inspired, the legions were also a living reminder of the terrible price of rebirth. Each warrior carried the weight of countless sacrifices, the blood and tears of those who had perished in the long, bitter struggle against chaos. In the quiet moments between battles, when the thunder of war gave way to reflective silence, many among these superhuman soldiers would contemplate the cost of their creation. They understood that their strength was born of a crucible of suffering, and that every victory achieved by the redeemed was stained by the memory of lives lost and dreams shattered. Despite these burdens, the legions pressed forward, their march a relentless testament to the resilience of the human spirit. With every battle fought and every enemy vanquished, they reclaimed a small piece of the legacy that had once defined mankind. Their disciplined ranks, united under the banner of the visionary's dream, began to stitch together a tapestry of hope from the tattered remnants of a fractured past. In their unwavering determination, they embodied the truth that even the deepest wounds could begin to heal when nurtured by the light of a shared purpose. Thus, beneath the vast, indifferent gaze of countless stars, the legions of the redeemed emerged as both warriors and harbingers of a new dawn. Their creation was a declaration that from the crucible of despair, a reborn humanity would rise, a force forged in the fires of sacrifice and tempered by the promise of unity. In every sinew and every heartbeat, they carried the legacy of those who had come before, and the hope of those who would follow, destined to lead the way toward a future where the shattered remnants of mankind might once again stand as one. From the embers of despair and disarray, a mighty force surged forth to reclaim what had long been lost. The visionary's call had ignited a fire in the hearts of countless survivors, drawing them from the shadows of isolation and uniting them under a single, determined purpose. Thus began the Great Crusade, a campaign not of wanton conquest, but of righteous reclamation and renewal, designed to restore the ancient unity of humankind. Across shattered worlds and ruined citadels, the promise of rebirth resonated like a clarion call. Abandoned cityscapes and desolate battlefields, once resigned to decay, now stirred with the restless spirit of resistance. The legions, freshly forged and imbued with superhuman might, advanced in disciplined formation. Their gleaming armor caught the faint light of distant stars, each measured step echoing with the determined rhythm of people reborn in adversity. In their wake, the dark vestiges of a fractured past began to crumble, making way for a future reimagined. Every maneuver in this grand campaign was meticulously planned by the visionary, whose strategic insight ensured that the crusade would be more than a series of battles. He envisioned a campaign that would not only reclaim lost worlds, but also rebuild the soul of humanity. His design was clear: dismantle the barriers that had long divided mankind and forge a united imperium from the scattered remnants of a once great civilization. The legions were more than mere soldiers. They were living symbols of that future, a beacon of resilience, honor, and unyielding determination. As the Great Crusade unfolded, fierce clashes emerged on long-forgotten planets. On these battle-scarred worlds, the legions demonstrated both unparalleled valor and strategic brilliance. Commanders, tempered by hardship and inspired by the visionaries' ideals, led their forces with precision. Starships soared through the void, and armies clashed in decisive engagements where each victory stitched together the torn fabric of human history. Yet, in every triumph, the heavy toll of sacrifice was evident. The scars of battle marred reclaimed worlds, bearing silent testimony to the cost of freedom and the burdens borne by those who fought for unity. In the aftermath of conflict, survivors began to rebuild. Ancient cities, once quiet in their decay, awakened as monuments to renewal. Reconstructed dwellings and re-established communities testified to the transformative power of the Crusade. Formerly isolated enclaves found strength in a shared purpose, and the collective memory of a united past stirred a desire to rebuild. In every reconstructed settlement, the dream of unity took root, nurturing hope that had long lain dormant beneath the weight of despair. Amid the battles and rebuilding, bonds among the legions grew ever stronger. Soldiers who had once been strangers found themselves united by hardship and the resolve to overcome the darkness. Their brotherhood was forged in the crucible of war, where loyalty was tested and tempered in the fires of relentless struggle. Together, they embraced a destiny defined not by past divisions, but by a common vision for the future, a future in which the legacy of a united humanity would be restored and preserved. Yet the path forward was not without its perils. Forces of chaos, ever lurking in the shadows, sought to exploit every fissure in human unity. The visionaries' plan was both a bold advance and a calculated risk, for with every step toward reclamation, the specter of betrayal and dissent loomed larger. Even so, the fervor of the crusade emboldened the legions to press on. Their collective resolve was strengthened by the certainty that every hard-won victory brought them closer to a new dawn. In the quiet moments between the clamor of battle, when the tumult subsided into fragile peace, the enduring promise of the Great Crusade became evident. It was a promise that transcended mere military might, a pledge to rebuild society from the ruins, to restore not only cities and technologies, but also the very spirit of humanity itself. Every reclaimed world and every act of valor served as a stepping stone along the long path toward redemption, paving the way for the eventual rebirth of a united imperium. Beneath the vast expanse of star-strewn skies, the Great Crusade continued its relentless advance. The visionaries' dream of unity resonated through the cosmos, and the legions, driven by duty and hope, marched onward toward an uncertain future. In every battle fought and every territory reclaimed, the light of a united humanity flickered anew, a promise that from the ashes of a broken past, a brighter tomorrow could yet be born. Amid the resounding surge of the Great Crusade, one figure emerged whose presence eclipsed the clamor of battle, a man destined to be remembered as the favored son. His rise was not marked by thunderous declarations, but by a quiet, compelling magnetism that captured the hearts and minds of those who fought for a reunited humanity. Born of the same visionary spirit that had sparked the Crusade, he possessed a rare blend of tactical genius, natural charisma, and an inner burden of expectation that set him apart from his peers. From his earliest days on the battlefield, his impact was unmistakable. Clad in armor that shimmered with a subtle inner light, he moved with both grace and lethal precision. Each command he issued carried the weight of an inevitable destiny, transforming chaotic skirmishes into moments of decisive order. His voice, firm yet measured, inspired his warriors not merely to fight, but to believe in a future reborn from the ashes of a fragmented past. For his soldiers, he was more than a commander. He embodied the very ideals of hope and unity that the Crusade sought to restore. In the heat of combat, the favored son demonstrated extraordinary valor and foresight. When enemy forces threatened to overwhelm even the most disciplined ranks, he appeared as though guided by fate, turning imminent defeat into a resounding victory. His intuition seemed almost supernatural. He anticipated enemy movements and countered them with swift, calculated maneuvers. Such feats not only saved countless lives, but also instilled an unwavering loyalty among his comrades, who began to see him as a living symbol of their shared destiny. Yet the cost of this exalted role weighed heavily on him. Beneath the aura of invincibility lay a solitary soul, burdened by the relentless expectations of those who saw him as the living promise of a united imperium. In quieter moments away from the roar of battle, he would gaze at the star-strewn heavens and ponder the sacrifices required to fulfill his destiny. These reflective interludes revealed a man both aware of his strengths and deeply conscious of his vulnerabilities. The bittersweet burden of leadership added a layer of solemnity to his character, deepening the reverence in which he was held by all who followed him. The bond between the favored son and the visionary was profound and shrouded in mystery. The visionary, whose silent guidance had kindled the flames of the Crusade, saw in his chosen one not merely a skilled commander, but the embodiment of a long-forgotten hope, a hope that could rekindle the once bright spirit of humanity. This connection, forged in the crucible of endless war and shared sacrifice, granted him an almost sacred authority. His achievements were celebrated as direct manifestations of the visionary's ambitions, and every victory he secured was a step toward the restoration of a lost unity. Yet even as his legend grew, murmurs of dissent stirred in the shadows. Among some of his fellow Primarchs, envy and quiet apprehension began to take root. They wondered if his rapid ascent might herald future discord, a division that could fracture the delicate bonds of brotherhood within the Crusade. Despite these undercurrents of jealousy, the favored son remained resolute. His commitment to the cause was unwavering. Every battle fought, every enemy repelled, reinforced his belief that his destiny was inextricably linked to the salvation of his people. In the encampments and fortresses scattered across reclaimed worlds, his exploits became the stuff of legend. Stories of how he turned a hopeless siege into a masterful rout, or how his mere presence on a desolate battlefield stirred even the most disheartened warriors to rise, spread quickly. His image, marked by both the brilliance of victory and the scars of sacrifice, emerged as an icon, a beacon in a dark universe. For those who clung to the dream of a united imperium, he was a symbol of possibility, a living testament that even in the midst of relentless war, hope could be reborn. Thus, as the Great Crusade pressed on, the ascendancy of the favored son became a pivotal chapter in the unfolding saga. His rise was both a celebration of human resilience and a portent of the trials that lay ahead. With every step he took, the light of unity grew a little brighter, even as the weight of his destiny pressed him forward. In a galaxy scarred by betrayal and strife, his unwavering determination offered a glimmer of promise. that one man's resolve, fueled by unwavering conviction, might yet alter the course of history and restore the legacy of a united humanity. Within the victorious echoes of the Great Crusade, beneath the resplendent triumphs and hard-won victories, subtle strains of discord began to creep into the heart of unity. The seeds of betrayal, sown in the fertile ground of ambition and hidden resentments, germinated in the shadows where trust had once flourished without question. Among the ranks of the Primarchs and their loyal legions, fissures started to appear, small, almost imperceptible, yet potent enough to threaten the very foundation of the unified Imperium. In quiet moments between battles and in the hushed whispers of council meetings, a few began to question the infallibility of the visionary's grand design. These doubts were not born of malice, but of the human condition itself, a desire for personal recognition and the pursuit of power that lurked within every soul. As the visionary's influence spread, so too did an undercurrent of envy and discontent. The favored sun's meteoric rise, once celebrated as a beacon of hope, now cast long shadows that ignited jealousy among his brethren. Some wondered why his destiny was singled out, suspecting that the seeds of greatness might harbor the potential for downfall. In the solitude of their private chambers and the secret corners of war-torn fortresses, the Primarchs who harbored such doubts gathered in whispers. Their voices, soft but resolute, expressed fears that the unity they fought for might fracture under the weight of individual ambition. They recalled the ideals once shared, now tainted by personal grievances and a hunger for recognition that threatened to undermine the collective purpose of the Crusade. A quiet rivalry emerged, not born of open hostility, but of silent resentment, a tension weaving its way into every strategic decision and every tactical maneuver. Even the most stalwart warriors, who had charged into battle with unyielding faith, began to feel the chill of betrayal in the subtle glances exchanged between comrades. Amid the clamor of victory, doubts started to fester. Old loyalties, once as unbreakable as adamantium, were now tested by the corrosive whispers of ambition. The unity that had fueled the reclamation of lost worlds trembled at the prospect of internal dissent. In the hearts of those united by a common cause, an insidious darkness took root, a darkness that promised power and personal glory at the expense of collective honor. Yet the seeds of betrayal were not entirely malign. In their quiet urgency, they also revealed the inherent complexity of leadership and the heavy price of greatness. The visionary, ever vigilant of the delicate balance he had wrought from chaos, sensed the growing undercurrents of discord. He watched with a sorrowful gaze as his once unassailable vision began to splinter, the bonds of brotherhood strained by whispered promises of individual glory and secret ambitions. Deep within, he understood that the path to a truly unified Imperium was fraught with peril, not solely from external foes, but from internal conflicts that threatened to tear asunder the very fabric of their collective identity. As these seeds took root, they nurtured a dangerous duality. On one hand, they underscored the undeniable truth that power, however noble its inception, can corrupt even the purest intentions. On the other hand, they forged a crucible in which the true metal of the Crusaders would be tested. Would they remain steadfast in their shared purpose, or would personal ambition fracture the unity so arduously won? The tension was palpable, as if the very air trembled with the promise of both redemption and ruin. In that critical juncture of subtle dissent and rising envy, the future of the Crusade hung in a precarious balance. The seeds of betrayal, though sown in quiet moments of doubt, threatened to erupt into a conflagration that might consume the united Imperium. In the silent interstices of strategy and ambition, These nascent fractures foretold a turning point, a moment when the bonds of brotherhood would be tested by the allure of power, and the fate of a unified humanity would ultimately hinge on choices made in the shadows of distrust. Now, in that pivotal moment, as doubt and envy mingled with the echoes of hard-won victories, the seeds of betrayal silently gathered strength, threatening to shatter the fragile unity that had been so painstakingly forged. The future of the Crusade now rested on a knife's edge, as personal ambition and collective destiny clashed in the quiet interlude before the next battle was waged. Each whispered secret and furtive glance carried the potential to spark a conflagration that might irrevocably alter the course of their united destiny. Thus, Betrayal's seed now sealed their uncertain fate. Amid the disciplined cadence of the Great Crusade, when unity still held a fragile promise over the ravaged cosmos, an unsettling murmur began to weave its way through the hearts of even the most steadfast warriors. In the quiet moments between battles, when the clamor of war subsided to a somber lull, there emerged faint, elusive voices, whispers of forbidden lore that defied the doctrines of the Imperium. These murmurs, like shadows dancing at the edges of one's consciousness, spoke of hidden powers, ancient truths, and the allure of chaos that promised liberation from the rigid constraints of order. At first, the forbidden whispers were but a subtle anomaly, a fleeting echo in the minds of those who had witnessed too much loss and despair. Yet, as the Crusade pressed forward and the toll of endless conflict deepened, these spectral voices began to seep into the souls of the redeemed. They came not with the clamor of armies, but in the quiet solitude of midnight vigils and the lonely hours before dawn, when the weight of duty and sacrifice pressed heavily on every heart. For some, these whispers carried the seductive promise of transcending mortal limitations, offering insights into realms of power that lay beyond the known laws of the universe. The favored son, whose brilliance and valor had once united legions, found himself not immune to these insidious suggestions. In moments of quiet introspection, as he reviewed the scars of battle and the cost of unyielding loyalty, he too began to hear these murmurs. They wove intricate tales of forgotten might and arcane energies, hinting that true strength might be harnessed by daring to embrace the chaos that lurked beneath the veneer of order. To his inner self, these forbidden voices were both a temptation and a dire warning, a call to power that promised emancipation from the relentless burdens of leadership, yet risked plunging him into a darkness from which there might be no return. As the whispers grew bolder, they began to infiltrate the corridors of the mind, challenging long-held beliefs and stoking the embers of discontent. In private moments away from the watchful eyes of his legionaries, the favored son found his thoughts straying toward the uncharted territories of forbidden knowledge. He questioned the absolute nature of the visionaries' doctrines and wondered if, perhaps, the rigid path of unity might be enriched by the volatile, untamed force that chaos represented. These dangerous ideas, though fleeting, stirred a profound inner conflict, a battle between the desire to remain the paragon of hope for his people and the allure of embracing a power that could elevate him beyond mortal frailty. Across the front lines, the impact of the forbidden whispers was felt more widely than anyone had dared to admit. In hushed conversations within war-torn encampments, a few soldiers confessed to experiencing unsettling visions, glimpses of alternate realities where the boundaries of life and death blurred into swirling mists of possibility. They spoke of a seductive freedom that lay in relinquishing the strictures of duty, of embracing a raw power that could reshape destiny itself. Such admissions, made in trembling voices, spread like ripples through the ranks, sowing seeds of doubt and discord among those who had once been united by a single, unyielding purpose. Yet, even as these murmurs threatened to undermine the hard-won unity of the Crusade, there remained within many hearts a steadfast loyalty to the vision of a restored Imperium. The forbidden whispers, dark and beguiling as they were, represented a perilous divergence from the path that had been so painstakingly charted by the visionary. Leaders and loyalists alike convened in secret, grappling with the unsettling realization that the very forces they sought to vanquish might now be exploiting the vulnerabilities born of endless conflict. They deliberated on the nature of power and the risk that yielding to such seduction could fracture the brotherhood that had sustained them through the darkest times. In this crucible of inner turmoil, the forbidden whispers became a symbol of the eternal struggle between order and chaos, a reminder that the greatest battles are not always fought on the fields of war, but within the hidden recesses of the soul. As the Crusade marched onward under a banner of unity and hope, the silent threat of these spectral voices loomed like a shadow over every triumph. Their promise of untamed power and ultimate freedom was a siren call that, if heeded, could irrevocably alter the destiny of not only the favored son, but of the Imperium itself. Thus, in the stillness of that pivotal hour, the forbidden whispers etched their mark upon the hearts of those destined to shape the future. Their presence, both a temptation and a warning, set the stage for the trials that would test the resolve of the redeemed, and would ultimately determine whether the light of unity could withstand the seductive darkness of chaos. At the convergence of hope and despair, the relentless march of the Great Crusade reached a pivotal juncture, a moment that would determine the future course of humanity. As legions pressed onward, and the echo of forbidden whispers persisted in their hearts, the tide of destiny began to shift. The unity forged in the fires of shared sacrifice now stood at a precipice, threatened by diverging paths and the allure of power beyond mortal ken. In the dim light of a war-torn encampment, commanders and warriors gathered to deliberate the next steps of the crusade. The air was heavy with anticipation and trepidation, as each soul sensed that the forthcoming decisions would echo through the ages. Among them, the favored son, ever a beacon of hope and resolve, found himself at the center of an internal maelstrom. His recent encounters with the seductive call of chaos had left him with a lingering uncertainty about the true nature of the visionary's design. Was it possible that the path laid out before them concealed a deeper truth, one that could both elevate and destroy their cause? As twilight merged into the soft glow of early dawn, a series of clandestine meetings unfolded. In hushed voices, trusted lieutenants and veteran commanders debated the merits of the established order against the promises whispered by the void. Some argued that embracing the mysterious powers hinted at in forbidden law might grant them an edge over their relentless foes. Others, however, cautioned that such a gamble risked corrupting the purity of their united purpose. In this charged atmosphere, the crossroads of destiny appeared not merely as a physical waypoint on their journey, but as a symbolic moment of moral reckoning. The favored son, burdened by the weight of leadership and the ghosts of his own doubts, listened intently to these discourses. In his heart, the struggle was deeply personal, a conflict between the enduring legacy of a united Imperium and the tantalizing prospect of untamed power that could, if wielded without restraint, shatter the bonds of brotherhood. His eyes, often described as windows to an unwavering soul, now betrayed the flicker of inner turmoil. Yet even amid uncertainty, he recognized that every decision bore the potential to define the future. The delicate balance between order and chaos teetered on the edge of his judgment. Beyond the encampment, The wider theatre of war echoed this internal conflict. On battlefields where light met shadow, warriors experienced moments of profound clarity amid the chaos. A solitary soldier, scarred by past losses, recalled the camaraderie that had once bound him to his brothers in arms. In his memory, the unity of their shared purpose shone like a beacon, urging him to resist the divisive allure of individual ambition. His silent prayer was that the sanctity of their collective endeavor would not be tarnished by the siren call of personal glory. At this critical crossroads, destiny demanded a choice, a commitment to the ideals that had sustained them through countless hardships, or a reckless plunge into the unknown depths of power. The favored son knew that the outcome of this internal battle would resonate far beyond his own fate. It was a test for every soul aligned with the Crusade, a challenge to remain steadfast in the face of seduction, or to falter and succumb to the corrupting promise of chaos. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, illuminating the battered remnants of past glories, a quiet resolve settled over the gathered warriors. The decision, though unspoken, resonated in every determined gaze. At that moment, the crossroads of destiny became more than a point of divergence. It transformed into a crucible in which the true character of the Crusade would be revealed. The choice was clear: to press on, united in the vision of a redeemed imperium, or to fracture under the weight of ambition and forbidden promise. In the silence before the coming storm, the future of humanity hung delicately in the balance, awaiting the next decisive step. Amid the relentless advance of the Great Crusade, the once indissoluble bonds of brotherhood began to show subtle but dangerous signs of wear. In the wake of countless shared victories and sacrifices, fissures emerged among the Primarchs and their legions, fissures that threatened to undermine the unified imperium they had fought so hard to restore. At first, these differences were almost imperceptible: a sidelong glance in a tense council, a brief hesitation in following a critical order. Yet, as time passed, these quiet moments of doubt and discontent accumulated into a pervasive tension that spread like a slow poison through the ranks. In the dim corridors of war-torn fortresses and during clandestine meetings held away from prying eyes, whispers of disillusionment and personal ambition began to circulate. What had once been a bond forged in the crucible of battle now wavered under the strain of individual pride and secret rivalries. The favored son, whose meteoric rise had once been a symbol of unity and hope, found himself increasingly isolated by the weight of expectation and envy. His every triumph, celebrated by many, now sparked hidden resentments among those who questioned his unique destiny. The very qualities that had set him apart, his brilliance, decisiveness, and commanding presence, became a mirror reflecting the ambitions and insecurities of his fellow Primarchs. Rivalries that had long been held in check by mutual respect began to surface, as each leader sought to carve out his own legacy within the grand design of the Crusade. In the quiet aftermath of battle, when the adrenaline of conflict faded into reflective silence, private conversations revealed that not all shared the same unyielding faith in the visionary's plan. Some questioned whether the dream of a united imperium was truly attainable or merely an illusion destined to shatter under the weight of personal ambition. These doubts, once fleeting, gradually festered into a subtle contest of wills. Loyalties that had been as steadfast as tempered steel now wavered, threatened by the corrosive influence of individual desire. Even among the common soldiers, those who had once drawn strength from their shared purpose, a quiet despair began to take hold. Memories of past glories and unbreakable unity were increasingly overshadowed by the bitter taste of betrayal and the lure of personal recognition. The collective spirit that had carried them through the darkest hours of war now seemed fragile, susceptible to the insidious influences of pride and envy. The venerable veterans and battle-hardened elders, who had sung the praises of unity in the early days of the Crusade, exchanged wary glances as rumors of dissent and covert alliances began to spread. Strategic meetings intended to chart a course toward redemption gradually turned into arenas for subtle power plays, where each Primarch sought to assert his own vision over the collective mandate. The visionary's grand plan, once a beacon of hope and order, now risked being overshadowed by the competing agendas of its executors. The sacred oath of unity, sworn in the fires of creation, was threatened by the relentless churn of personal ambition. As the internal fractures deepened, the very essence of the Brotherhood was at risk. The bonds that had once united warriors in a common cause began to unravel, leaving behind a bitter residue of mistrust and resentment. The unity that had driven the Crusade forward now stood on a knife's edge, its future uncertain and its strength challenged by the seductive lure of individual glory. In this critical juncture, the Unraveling Brotherhood became a somber testament to the fragility of human alliances. The fate of the Imperium no longer rested solely on the valor of its soldiers or the strategic brilliance of its commanders, but on whether the bonds of brotherhood could be mended before they completely disintegrated. In the quiet moments between decisive battles, each whispered word and furtive glance carried the potential to ignite a conflagration that might ultimately shatter the unity they had so painstakingly built. Thus, as the Great Crusade pressed onward into the unknown, the emerging fractures within the Brotherhood cast a long and ominous shadow over the future. The unity that had once been their greatest strength now faced its most severe test, a test that would determine whether the Imperium could withstand the corrosive power of ambition or fall apart beneath the weight of its own internal strife. On the outer edges of the restored Imperium, far from the heart of the united front, the true nature of the conflict began to reveal itself in brutal clarity. Isolated worlds, once considered peripheral and forgotten, now became the first theatres where the stark divide between loyalist and heretical forces was waged with unyielding ferocity. Here, on these fringes of civilization, the seeds of civil discord erupted into violent skirmishes that underscored the growing rift within humanity. In a barren system on the edge of known space, where ancient relics of lost civilizations lay half-buried in the sands of time, a lone planet became the stage for a conflict that would signal the start of an inevitable civil war. The planet, scarred by previous wars and battered by endless cosmic storms, had long served as a waypoint for drifting exiles and renegade factions. Now it was a battleground where the loyalists, steadfast in their adherence to the visionary's promise, and those seduced by forbidden ambition, clashed in a deadly dance. The loyalist forces, remnants of the once united legions, arrived in disciplined formations. Their battle-worn armor and steadfast resolve bore testimony to the sacrifices they had made for the Imperium's grand design. They marched with the unspoken determination of those who believed that unity, however fragile, was the only salvation against the encroaching chaos. Their commanders, hardened by countless campaigns, led with measured tactics honed in the fires of previous conflicts. Every soldier, from the highest-ranking officer to the lowliest foot soldier, shared in a common conviction that the true strength of humanity lay in its collective spirit. Opposing them were the heretical forces, a motley band of insurgents and disaffected warriors who had been seduced by the allure of individual power and the dark promises whispered in the void. They fought not for the restoration of a united Imperium, but for a new order where personal ambition eclipsed the old bonds of brotherhood. Their ranks were a chaotic mix, united by the promise of freedom from the strictures imposed by the visionary, yet divided by the very ambition that drove them. Their tactics were unpredictable, striking with guerrilla precision and vanishing into the hostile terrain before organized counterattacks could take hold. As battle erupted on this forlorn world, the conflict unfolded in waves of relentless fury. Explosions shattered the quiet desolation of ancient ruins, and the clamor of energy weapons echoed across desolate plains. Amid the chaos, the Loyalist forces fought with an almost desperate unity. Their coordinated assaults, driven by a deep-seated hope for a future reclaimed from the grip of betrayal, met the erratic onslaught of the insurgents. In the muddy trenches and amidst the crumbling facades of long-abandoned fortresses, valor clashed with treachery. Each encounter on the fringes carried the bitter taste of a conflict that was both new and achingly familiar, a war where the price of ambition was measured in blood and shattered dreams. For the Loyalists, every victory on the fringe was a small yet vital reclaiming of lost honor, a reminder that even on the outskirts of the Imperium, the promise of unity was worth the cost. The battlefields, though remote, became symbolic microcosms of the larger struggle, a test of whether the bonds forged in the crucible of shared sacrifice could withstand the corrosive allure of personal ambition. Here, on this isolated world, the dichotomy of hope and despair played out in stark detail. The enemy's erratic assaults challenged not only the martial prowess of the Loyalist warriors, but also the very ideals upon which they had built their lives. In the midst of this relentless clash, commanders on both sides came to realize that the war on the fringe was more than a peripheral conflict. It was a harbinger of the inevitable schism that would soon engulf the entire Imperium, a reminder that the greatest threat to unity could come from within. As the fierce skirmishes raged on, every fallen soldier and every shattered banner etched the truth into the hearts of those who remained, that the future of humanity would be decided not only by external foes, but by the internal battles waged in the shadow of ambition and betrayal. Thus, on this remote and battered world, the war on the fringe raged with a raw intensity that presaged the coming storm, a storm that would challenge the very soul of a people determined to reclaim their lost unity. On a distant world, long forgotten by the sprawling Imperium, stood a solitary bastion, a fortress of ancient stone and reinforced alloy that had weathered the storms of countless wars. Here, in the silent void between glory and decay, the true mettle of the Crusaders was put to the test. The siege of Solitude had begun, marking the first major confrontation where the forces of loyalty clashed headlong with those seduced by heretical ambition. The planet itself was a study in contrasts. Its surface, scarred by eons of natural fury and the ravages of past conflicts, bore remnants of civilizations that had risen and fallen like the ebb and flow of a tide. At the heart of this desolation, the fortress loomed, a relic of a bygone age, its towering walls and labyrinthine passages embodying both the ingenuity and isolation of its creators. It was here that the Loyalist legions sought to make their stand, determined to hold the last vestige of order against the encroaching chaos. For months, the siege raged with a relentless intensity. Loyalist forces, united by a common resolve and driven by memories of a united Imperium, manned the ancient ramparts with steadfast discipline. Every stone, every bastion of the fortress was imbued with the hope of a future reclaimed from the shadows. Under the command of battle-hardened generals, they organized their defenses with both modern tactics and traditional valor. Their artillery pounded the advancing enemy, and energy shields flared to life in bursts of brilliant light, repelling the heretical onslaught. Opposing them were the insurgents, soldiers and traitors whose hearts had turned away from the dream of unity. They attacked with a ferocity born of desperation and ambition, launching coordinated assaults designed to break the will of the defenders. Using hit-and-run tactics, stealth units scaled the outer walls under the cover of darkness, while mechanized columns rumbled forward in full force under the glare of distant stars. Their strategy was simple: overwhelm the ancient defenses by exploiting every gap and weakness, regardless of the cost. The clash between the disciplined legions and these audacious rebels transformed the planet's barren landscape into a theater of war, where every heartbeat carried the weight of destiny. In the midst of the chaos, commanders on both sides were forced to confront not only the enemy, but also the ideological rift that had long festered beneath the surface. For the Loyalists, the siege was more than a battle for a fortress. It was a desperate stand for the unity and honor that had once defined their people. Every breach repelled, every counterattack launched, reaffirmed their belief that even the most solitary stronghold could serve as a symbol of hope for a fractured humanity. Their resolve was etched in the scars that marred the fortress walls, scars that bore silent testimony to the countless lives sacrificed in defense of a higher ideal. Yet the insurgents fought with equal conviction, driven by the seductive promise of a new order unbound by the chains of the past. Their voices, raised in the heat of battle, spoke of a future where personal ambition and unbridled power would reign, where the old dogmas of unity and brotherhood were nothing more than relics to be discarded. Each successful incursion into the fortress's outer defenses was a blow to the Loyalists, a stark reminder that the seeds of treachery had already taken root among those who once swore to uphold the Imperium's legacy. As days bled into nights and the siege wore on, the battered defenders and relentless attackers alike came to understand that the struggle for Solitude was a microcosm of the larger war. In this crucible of iron and flame, the battle for a solitary fortress mirrored the internal conflict that threatened to tear the Imperium apart. Every fallen warrior, every shattered banner, underscored the bitter reality that the future of humanity would be forged in the fires of such bitter encounters. Thus, amidst the relentless barrage of artillery and the echoing cries of combat, the siege of Solitude became a defining moment, a battle that would test the resolve of the Loyalists and reveal whether the dream of unity could withstand the corrosive allure of rebellion. In the quiet aftermath of relentless warfare, when the fires of battle had finally begun to dim, a different kind of conflict emerged. A struggle waged not with weapons, but within the hearts and minds of those who had once been united by a common cause. Across ravaged battlefields and in the hushed corridors of shattered fortresses, the wounds of the Crusade took on a new form as the rifts of redemption started to form. Within the high ranks of the Primarchs, those mighty warriors who had once epitomized the spirit of unity, inner turmoil began to surface. Away from the thunder of combat, in moments of solitude and reflection, many confronted the heavy cost of their ambition. They wrestled with memories of harsh decisions and irrevocable losses, each scar a bitter reminder that their triumphs had been built on sacrifice and regret. One Primarch, renowned for his unyielding ferocity on the battlefield, now found his nights haunted by the faces of fallen comrades. His mind replayed moments when mercy was sacrificed at the altar of victory, and in these quiet hours he questioned if the glory of conquest was worth the lingering sorrow. Elsewhere, on the fringes of the Imperium, where survivors clung to the remnants of civilization, small groups of loyalist warriors gathered in secret. In the dim light of ruined sanctuaries, these battle-hardened veterans shared whispered recollections of a time when unity had been their greatest strength. They spoke of an era when Brotherhood was unbreakable, a time when loyalty had not yet been tainted by personal ambition or the seductive lure of power. In these private councils, old wounds were revisited and grievances aired. Confessions that had long been buried under layers of pride began to emerge, as men recognized that healing might begin only by facing the bitter truth of their shared past. Even the favored son, once a blazing symbol of hope and leadership, could not escape the pull of his own inner conflict. In the solitude of his private quarters, he grappled with the realization that his rise had been marred by choices that now weighed heavily on his soul. The accolades of victory, once a source of inspiration, had grown dim in the light of the sacrifices made by those who had followed him into battle. In introspective moments, he questioned whether the united imperium he had helped forge could ever be cleansed of the blood and sorrow that stained its history. Determined to find solace, he sought counsel from trusted aides, pondering ways to mend the fractures that threatened to shatter the bonds of brotherhood. Amid this personal reckoning, whispers of redemption began to echo throughout the ranks. Small acts of contrition and gestures of forgiveness emerged as tentative bridges over the yawning chasms of mistrust. Soldiers who had once clashed over perceived slights now exchanged cautious words, each apology a small step toward rebuilding what had been lost. These moments of vulnerability, shared in the quiet after the storm of battle, sparked a fragile hope that the wounds of war might eventually begin to heal. In the wake of relentless conflict, the process of atonement took on a life of its own. Rivalries that had festered in silence were slowly supplanted by a collective desire to move forward, a desire to rebuild not only cities and armies, but the very spirit of the brotherhood that had once united them. The path to redemption was neither swift nor easy. It was a slow, deliberate journey that demanded both humility and courage. Each act of reconciliation, however small, chipped away at the bitterness that had taken root in the hearts of the Crusaders. Thus, as the battered remnants of the Great Crusade regrouped and prepared for future trials, the rifts of redemption emerged as a quiet counterpoint to the chaos of war. They stood as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the depths of despair, there is always the possibility of renewal. In acknowledging their past misdeeds and striving to forge a path toward forgiveness, the warriors of the Imperium began to weave a fragile tapestry of hope, a tapestry that, if nurtured, might one day restore the lost unity of a people divided by ambition and sorrow. As the once unified Crusade began to show deep internal fractures, the escalating tensions erupted into an all-out storm that would forever change the course of history. On the fringes of the Imperium and deep within its shattered heart, a tempest of rebellion gathered strength, a chaos of anger, ambition, and defiance that threatened to engulf both traitors and loyalists alike. In the outer systems, where isolated worlds bore the scars of past conflicts, whispers of insurrection turned into shouts of revolt. Factions that had long harbored secret resentments, once content to remain in the shadows of their commander's greatness, now found the courage to defy the central authority. The seeds of betrayal, sown over months of subtle dissent and hidden ambitions, burst forth in violent uprisings. Insurgent groups emerged from the darkness, armed with a raw desire to break free from what they saw as the suffocating grip of the visionaries' decrees. They denounced the old order, calling for a new future built on the tenets of personal power and unbridled autonomy. On several battered worlds, cities that had once stood as symbols of unity crumbled into battlegrounds. Crowds, embittered by years of sacrifice and neglect, took up arms with a fervor born of desperation. The loyalist forces, still clinging to the hope of restoring a united Imperium, found themselves outnumbered and overwhelmed by the chaotic energy of rebellion. In these volatile moments, the storm was not a distant threat. It was a raging inferno, consuming every remnant of discipline and trust that had once bound the Crusaders together. Within the command centers of both sides, military strategists and hardened veterans scrambled to adapt. For the Loyalists, every loss in the field was a bitter reminder that the internal rift was as dangerous as any external enemy. Commanders debated fiercely, their voices echoing in stark corridors as they weighed the merits of strict discipline against the need for flexibility in the face of insurgent tactics. The enemy, in contrast, employed a ruthless blend of guerrilla warfare and scorched earth strategies. They struck swiftly and disappeared into the labyrinthine depths of ruined cities, sowing chaos wherever they went. Their tactics were unpredictable, and their aim was clear: to dismantle the established order and to claim power in a new era defined by rebellion. As the rebellion intensified, individual battles took on the character of epic duels, where loyalty clashed with treachery and brother fought against brother. In one such confrontation on a windswept frontier world, a regiment of loyalist soldiers found themselves ambushed by insurgents who had mastered the art of hit-and-run warfare. The loyalists, caught off guard, fought desperately to regroup. Amid the cacophony of energy blasts and the shrill cry of defiant battle horns, both sides suffered heavy losses. In the midst of the carnage, a young officer of the Loyalists, her face set in grim determination, rallied her comrades with a call to honor. Her words, though lost in the din of battle, ignited a spark of hope, a reminder that even in the heart of rebellion, the ideals of unity and sacrifice could not be easily extinguished. Back at the strategic centers, the rising tide of revolt forced the High Command to reconsider their plans. The visionary's dream, once a shining beacon guiding the Crusade's advance, now seemed like a distant memory overshadowed by the bitter reality of internal strife. Advisors argued over whether to tighten the centralized command or to grant greater autonomy to local leaders, a concession that might pacify some rebels, but risked further fragmentation. The storm of rebellion was not just a military conflict, it was a struggle for the very soul of the Imperium. It challenged the fundamental belief that unity could be maintained through force alone. In this turbulent crucible, the storm of rebellion raged with a ferocity that foretold a long and bitter conflict ahead. Every fallen soldier, every shattered banner, became a symbol of a lost trust and a dream slipping further from reach. The battlefield was no longer merely a place of honor and valor. It had transformed into a maelstrom where the hopes and fears of an entire civilization collided. And as the tempest gathered momentum, it was clear that the fate of the Imperium would be decided not only on the fields of war, but in the hearts of those who dared to choose between unity and rebellion. Amid the ever-deepening divisions within the Imperium, one Primarch's downfall emerged as a tragic turning point that would forever alter the course of history. Once celebrated as the embodiment of unwavering loyalty, honor, and unity, the lost Paragon had stood as a paragon among his brothers, a beacon of hope for a unified humanity. His legion, renowned for its discipline and valor, marched under his banner with fervent belief in the Emperor's vision. For years he led his warriors to glorious victories, forging a legacy that seemed destined to elevate the Crusade to unprecedented heights. Yet as the fires of battle burned and the relentless struggles of the Great Crusade wore on, doubt began to creep into the lost Paragon's heart. In quiet moments away from the roar of combat, he found himself haunted by the harsh realities of a fractured Imperium. The unity he once embodied appeared to be crumbling beneath the weight of internal rivalries, the seductive lure of forbidden power, and the bitter taste of betrayal. The voices of dissent, once mere murmurs in the dark, grew louder with each passing day, challenging the righteousness of the Emperor's design and casting shadows over the ideals that had once guided him. Tormented by these internal conflicts, the lost Paragon increasingly questioned whether his lifelong dedication to the Emperor's cause was truly in humanity's best interest. In his solitude, he weighed the burden of duty against the promise of liberation offered by voices that spoke of freedom and individual greatness. He recalled the countless sacrifices made by his legion, the blood shed in the name of unity, and wondered if that very unity was now a shackle binding them to a doomed dream. Every battle fought and every victory won had come at a tremendous cost, a cost that now seemed too great to bear. In the stillness of one fateful night, as the stars cast their pale light upon his private quarters, the lost Paragon reached a breaking point. The seductive murmur of rebellion, once a distant echo, now thundered in his ears. In that solitary hour, he resolved that the Emperor's rigid dream had become a prison rather than a path to salvation. His heart, heavy with regret and disillusionment, could no longer bear the burden of a unity that was crumbling under the weight of its own ambition. With a final, anguished sigh, he chose the path of defiance, embracing the promise of chaos as a means to forge a new destiny for himself and his legion. His decision echoed far beyond the confines of his solitary chamber. The betrayal of the lost Paragon sent tremors through the Imperium. His once loyal legion, shocked by their leader's turn, faltered momentarily before the seduction of newfound freedom took hold. Rumors spread like wildfire, and the unity of the Crusade, already fractured by internal strife, began to splinter irreparably. Those who had admired his strength now questioned his judgment, and the sacred bonds of brotherhood that had once defined the Great Crusade started to unravel. His fall was not merely a personal loss, it was the shattering of an ideal. The dream of a unified humanity, once cherished as the highest purpose, was now tainted by betrayal and despair. In that dark moment, the legacy of the lost Paragon was forever altered, marking the beginning of a new era defined by fragmentation and the relentless pursuit of power. Thus, the lost Paragon's fall was not merely an isolated act of betrayal, but a seismic event that shattered the collective spirit of the Imperium. His decision to embrace the seductive lure of chaos resonated as a cautionary tale among the Primarchs and common soldiers alike. It signaled that even the most revered leaders could succumb to doubt and ambition, unraveling the bonds of unity they had once so diligently forged. In the wake of his defection, the Imperium was left to grapple with the painful consequences of shattered ideals, as the promise of a united future dimmed under the shadow of rebellion. This tragic turning point ultimately marked the start of darkness. As the fires of rebellion reached a fevered pitch, the galaxy's remnants trembled beneath a new and terrible reality. No longer content with mere acts of betrayal on the battlefield, the traitor legions began to unleash their full fury upon entire worlds. The burning of worlds was not simply a military campaign, it was an apocalyptic reckoning, a violent purge intended to erase the vestiges of loyalty and remind all of the price of defiance. Across distant star systems, once thriving planets were reduced to embers. The traitor forces, fueled by a malignant blend of ambition and retribution, deployed weapons of unimaginable destruction. Orbital bombardments rained down on populous worlds, their relentless heat igniting vast expanses of urban sprawl. Cities that had once stood as beacons of human achievement were quickly transformed into charred ruins. In moments, The proud monuments of civilization crumbled, leaving behind only smouldering wreckage and sorrowful echoes of what had been. On the surface of one such world, known in ancient records as Aurelion, the devastation was both breathtaking and brutal. The traitor legions advanced with calculated ruthlessness, their mechanized columns, silhouetted against a blood-red sky, moved inexorably toward the heart of the planet's greatest city. With the precision of a master tactician, they struck simultaneously on multiple fronts. Energy weapons, honed to perfection and imbued with chaotic power, tore through the defenses of Aurelion's beleaguered inhabitants. In the blink of an eye, the sprawling metropolis was engulfed in infernal flames that consumed its storied past. Witnessing the relentless onslaught, survivors could only cling to the hope of salvation. Yet the loyalist forces, though valiantly striving to stem the tide of destruction, found themselves overwhelmed by the ferocity of the rebellion. In the embattled corridors of makeshift command centers, desperate orders were barked over comms that crackled with static and despair. The loyalists fought not merely to hold territory, but to save the fading spark of human unity. Their struggle was marked by both heroic defiance and heart-wrenching loss, each casualty a stark reminder of what was at stake. The traitors, on the other hand, reveled in the chaos. They viewed the burning of worlds as a purgative act, a necessary cleansing to purge the old order and herald a new age defined by freedom from the Emperor's oppressive vision. Propaganda, dark and insidious, spread through the ranks, tales of reborn futures forged from the ashes of a corrupted past. Yet for many, the brutal reality of these scorched planets became an indelible scar, a visual testament to the price of ambition unchecked. Even among the traitors, a quiet unease began to take root as the flames consumed not only enemy strongholds, but also the hope of a peaceful transformation. As the battle for Aurelion raged, distant worlds experienced similar fates. Entire star systems fell into disarray, their populations driven to desperate measures or swept away by cosmic infernos. Satellite cities orbiting shattered planets flickered like dying embers against the void of space. The reverberations of these atrocities spread across the galaxy, sowing fear and uncertainty in equal measure. Once, the promise of a unified imperium had bound disparate peoples together. Now, the burning of worlds threatened to permanently sever those bonds, leaving behind a galaxy divided by flames and bitterness. Yet even amid the devastation, small pockets of resistance clung stubbornly to life. Underground shelters, hidden from prying eyes, became havens for those determined to rebuild, even as the landscape around them was transformed into a wasteland of fire and ash. In these secret enclaves, survivors whispered of a time when the light of unity had not yet been extinguished, and their resolve to kindle that spark again burned as fiercely as the incendiary weapons that scarred the heavens. The burning of worlds was a brutal, irrevocable shift in the tides of war, a vivid demonstration that the forces of chaos would accept no compromise. It forced both traitors and loyalists alike to confront the harsh reality that the galaxy was no longer a realm of order and hope, but a battleground where every world, every life, was at risk of being consumed by unquenchable flames. In this new, fiery era, the destiny of humanity hung in the balance, its fate written in the ashes of those who dared to dream of a unified future. In the wake of worlds set ablaze and dreams reduced to smoldering ash, the ancient bonds of loyalty that had once held the Imperium together began to crack, and then, irrevocably, to shatter. It was as if the very oath that had united the Primarchs, sworn upon the blood and honor of countless sacrifices, had splintered under the weight of ambition, betrayal, and despair. Now, The shattered oath reverberated across battlefields and council chambers alike, a mournful testament to a unity lost. On the scarred plains of a long-forgotten frontier world, loyalist legions and rebellious factions clashed in a desperate struggle. The oath that had bound them together in the early days of the Crusade now lay in tatters amid the cries of a people betrayed by their own kin. Former brothers in arms, who had once fought side by side under the banner of a united imperium, now eyed one another with suspicion and grief. The sense of camaraderie, that sacred covenant of mutual trust, had been broken, replaced by the raw pain of betrayal and the bitterness of disillusionment. In one forlorn outpost, a city of stone and ruin, the remnants of a once proud garrison gathered in a dilapidated war room. Its walls, once adorned with symbols of unity and the Emperor's light, now bore scars and crude markings that told of desperate struggles and internal strife. Veteran commanders, faces etched with fatigue and sorrow, recounted the days when an oath was more than just words spoken in solemn ceremony. They remembered a time when the pledge to uphold the Imperium was a living force, binding hearts together against the darkness. Now, however, that force was but a ghost, a whisper of what had been, as the ideals of sacrifice and honor dissolved into bitter regret. Amid this somber assembly, heated voices rose in desperate debate. Some argued that the broken oath was an inevitable casualty of endless warfare, a necessary price to pay for the survival of a scattered humanity. Others contended that once loyalty was fractured, the very soul of the Imperium was doomed to decay. Every word was laden with the weight of lost comrades and shattered trust. The discussions, at once both strategic and deeply personal, revealed that the dissolution of the oath was not simply a matter of military setback. It was a profound moral crisis that cut to the core of what it meant to be human. At the heart of this crisis stood the memory of the lost Paragon, whose betrayal had been the first to shatter the sacred bond. His fall had rippled outward, fracturing the unity among the Primarchs and igniting a wildfire of dissent. Once the lost Paragon had epitomized the promise of unity and strength, his every command a clarion call to higher purpose. Now his name was invoked in hushed tones as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that even the most revered could succumb to ambition and the seductive lure of personal power. His treachery had not only undermined the Crusade, but had set in motion the slow, inexorable erosion of the very vows that had once been the foundation of the Imperium. As battles raged on across the shattered expanse of the galaxy, the remnants of the shattered oath took on a life of their own. For some, the collapse of that sacred promise ignited a desperate desire to restore what had been lost. In secret conclaves and hidden warrens, small groups of loyalists gathered to reaffirm their commitment to an ideal that now seemed all too fragile. They swore new oaths, quiet, heartfelt pledges to rebuild trust, to honor the memory of those who had fallen in the name of unity. These whispered promises, though tentative and fragile, were beacons of hope amid overwhelming darkness. Yet for many, the oath was lost forever, a casualty of betrayal and the relentless pull of chaos. The shattered remnants of loyalty served as a constant reminder that the Imperium, once thought invincible, was in peril not merely from external foes, but from the corrosive power of internal dissent. The broken covenant echoed across star systems, its resonance a somber dirge for a unity that had been as ephemeral as it was exalted. In that crucible of despair and defiance, the shattered oath became a symbol of the Imperium's tragic fate. It signified the end of an era where brotherhood was sacred and the promise of a united future shone bright. Now, in its place, There remained only the cold, hard reality that in the hearts of men, loyalty was as fragile as glass, and just as easily shattered. Under a sky choked with smoke and sorrow, the long-anticipated confrontation between light and darkness finally unfolded. In a desolate expanse at the edge of the known galaxy, where starlight fought through oppressive clouds of war and despair, the forces of the Imperium and the traitorous rebels prepared to meet in battle. The atmosphere was electric with tension, as if the cosmos itself held its breath in anticipation of the collision of fates. For years, the discord between loyalist legions and those who had succumbed to betrayal had simmered like a festering wound. Now, at this fateful crossroads, the hardened warriors of both camps converged. On one side, the resolute loyalists, scarred by loss but unbowed, stood ready with banners that still bore the symbols of the Emperor's once unifying light. Their eyes, hardened by endless conflict, shone with a determination to reclaim what had been lost, to restore the fractured unity that had once defined humanity. On the opposing side, the traitors, twisted by ambition and embittered by disillusionment, marched with a grim resolve. Their armor was adorned with dark insignias, a stark contrast to the regal symbols of the Imperium, and in their gaze burned a fervor for a future unburdened by ancient oaths. At the center of the impending clash, amid the scattered remnants of shattered fortifications and smoldering debris, the commanders of both forces prepared for an encounter that was as inevitable as it was cataclysmic. The commanding officer of the Loyalists, a battle-hardened veteran whose voice had rallied countless soldiers in times of despair, surveyed the field with unwavering resolve. He recalled the days when brotherhood and honor were the unbreakable bonds that sustained them, and his heart burned with the need to see that unity restored, even if it meant confronting the darkest aspects of their past. Opposite him, the leader of the traitorous rebels, once a revered figure among the Primarchs, now carried the weight of his own choices in his grim, defiant eyes. His betrayal had carved deep scars not only in the hearts of his former comrades, but in the very fabric of the Imperium. As the first volleys of energy weapons tore through the still air, a maelstrom of chaos erupted. Loyalist shields flared to life, absorbing blasts that would have otherwise obliterated entire battalions, while the traitors advanced with ruthless precision, exploiting every gap in the enemy lines. The battlefield became a swirling canvas of light and darkness, each explosion a punctuation mark in the epic struggle between order and rebellion. Amid the deafening roar of combat, individual duels broke out, personal vendettas that echoed the larger conflict. A loyalist captain clashed with a traitorous champion beneath the flickering glow of a dying star, their blades meeting in sparks of fury and regret. Each strike, each parry, was a testament to the deep, irreconcilable rift that had grown between those who once shared the same dreams. In the midst of this violent ballet, the confrontation evolved into more than a mere clash of arms. It became a crucible for the soul of the Imperium. The Loyalists fought not only to defeat their foes, but to salvage the fading ideals of unity and honor. Their battle cries rang out with a desperate hope that the darkness could be vanquished, that the shattered remnants of their once mighty brotherhood might yet be mended. On the other side, the traitors fought with a savage intensity born of the belief that the old order was irredeemable, that only by tearing down the established bonds could a new, unrestrained future emerge. As the conflict raged, strategic maneuvers unfolded with heart-wrenching precision. Flanking units on both sides moved like phantoms in the smoky haze, seeking to outwit and outflank their adversaries. Commanders issued orders over crackling comms, their voices a blend of authority and anguish, aware that every decision now carried the burden of history. The confrontation was not a singular, isolated event, but the culmination of years of simmering discontent and the painful sacrifices made on the altar of ambition. In the final, brutal moments of the battle, as the tide of combat shifted unpredictably, both sides bore witness to the stark reality of their choices. The Loyalists, fighting with every last vestige of hope, managed to hold their ground in a defiant stand. Yet the cost was staggering. A generation of warriors had been scarred by loss, their dreams of unity left in tatters. The traitors, for all their ferocity, found that the power they had so eagerly embraced came at the price of everlasting isolation and regret. In that dark, turbulent hour, the confrontation of shadows served as a somber reminder that the future of the Imperium would be forged not solely in the heat of battle, but in the choices made by those brave enough to confront both their enemies and their own inner darkness. In the twilight of an era once defined by hope and unity, a single figure emerged as the embodiment of all that was noble, a beacon whose radiance had once guided countless souls through the darkness. But now, amid the swirling chaos of rebellion and shattered oaths, that light was destined to flicker and fall. The Lightbearer, once celebrated for his unyielding optimism and martial prowess, now found himself isolated at the crossroads of destiny, his downfall a poignant symbol of the Imperium's unraveling. For decades, the Lightbearer had stood as a paragon among the Primarchs. His presence on the battlefield was both awe-inspiring and reassuring. Soldiers rallied to his call, and his radiant armor seemed to channel the Emperor's divine grace. In his early days, he had led his legion to spectacular victories, restoring order and kindling a fire of unity that shone brightly in even the darkest corners of the galaxy. To the common soldier, he was hope incarnate, a living testament to the promise of a united humanity. Yet, as the years advanced and the spectre of internal dissent grew ever more menacing, the brilliance of the Lightbearer began to wane. Behind the veneer of his inspiring smile, a growing weariness took root, a silent agony born of witnessing the slow disintegration of the ideals he had once held sacred. His own heart, once untroubled by doubt, now bore the scars of betrayal and sorrow. In quiet moments away from the tumult of war, he would stare into the vastness of space, pondering the price of unity and the heavy toll exacted by endless conflict. Rumors of treachery had long circulated in hushed tones among the ranks, and even the Lightbearer was not immune to the corrosive influence of dissent. Whispers of a different path, a future where individual ambition triumphed over collective sacrifice, crept insidiously into his mind. These forbidden ideas, seeded by those who sought to upend the Emperor's decrees, began to erode the certainty that had once defined him. His inner circle, once a bastion of loyalty and trust, now teemed with doubt and furtive glances. Slowly, the unwavering light he had once carried started to dim, flickering in the face of mounting internal strife. The turning point came during a fateful council in a war-torn citadel on a remote world. As the gathered Primarchs and commanders debated the future of the Imperium, the Lightbearer's voice, once clear and resolute, wavered with uncertainty. His proposals for unity were met with quiet skepticism, and old wounds were reopened by bitter accusations. In that charged atmosphere, he felt the weight of his own failure press down upon him. For the first time, he questioned whether his lifelong devotion had been in vain. Had he, in his pursuit of hope, become blind to the corrosive ambition festering within the very ranks he sought to inspire? That day, as the council disbanded in disarray, the Lightbearer walked the cold, desolate corridors of his chamber, every step echoing with the grief of unfulfilled promises. The dreams of a radiant future, once so vivid and real, now dissolved into a mire of regret and despair. In a moment of excruciating clarity, he understood that he had become a prisoner of his own ideals, a relic of an era that could no longer sustain itself amid the relentless tides of rebellion and self-interest. In the ensuing days, the decline of the Lightbearer was both swift and agonizing. His once loyal legion, inspired by his earlier valor, began to fracture. Soldiers who had once marched with pride now cast troubled glances toward their fallen leader, uncertain whether to follow or to abandon the crumbling legacy of unity. The Lightbearer, tormented by guilt and disillusionment, withdrew from the battlefield. His radiant armor dulled, and his eyes, once alight with fierce determination, now held a sorrowful resignation. The galaxy watched in mournful silence as the emblem of hope retreated into shadow, a signal that the era of unblemished unity had come to an end. Thus, the fall of the Lightbearer became a somber omen for the Imperium. His decline was not marked by an external enemy's sword, but by the quiet internal collapse of a belief system once thought unassailable. The shattered light of his legacy served as a lasting reminder that even the brightest beacons may be snuffed out when the bonds of loyalty and honor are eroded by the corrosive forces of ambition and despair. And as the remnants of his once glorious legion drifted into the darkness, the Imperium faced a future that seemed destined to be defined by loss, betrayal, and the painful absence of hope. In the twilight of an Imperium torn asunder, the final Gambit was set into motion, a desperate last stand to reclaim a future that had slipped away into chaos. On a barren world scarred by endless warfare, the Loyalist forces gathered for one ultimate decisive confrontation. Every soldier, every commander, felt the weight of fate upon their shoulders as they prepared to launch a counterstrike that might either restore unity or plunge the galaxy into irrevocable darkness. For months, the Loyalists had endured setbacks, watching as traitor legions expanded their dominion with ruthless efficiency. Their losses were etched into the memories of those who still believed in the Emperor's ancient dream. Now, driven by the embers of hope and the haunting spectre of their fallen Lightbearer, they knew that this final Gambit could be the turning point. It was a plan born of both ingenuity and desperation, a daring maneuver that risked everything on a single coordinated assault against the heart of the traitor's newly established stronghold. In the dim light of the pre-dawn hours, the air trembled with anticipation. Commanders huddled over battered maps, tracing lines of strategy with trembling fingers. Every detail had been meticulously planned. Diversionary attacks would be launched on multiple fronts, drawing the enemy's attention away from the main thrust. A small elite unit, the vanguard of the Last Oath, would infiltrate the central citadel, where the traitorous warlord had amassed his forces, and the symbols of the fractured Imperium were hoisted as trophies of defiance. Their mission was clear: to strike at the enemy's core and shatter the foundation of his power before reinforcements could arrive. As the first light of dawn pierced the horizon, the Loyalist legions surged forward. Their battle formations, though ragged from previous losses, were driven by a fierce determination. The roar of engines and the thunder of armored vehicles melded with the cries of warriors, creating a symphony of defiance that echoed across the desolate plains. At the same time, diversionary forces attacked with relentless vigor, igniting chaos along the enemy's flanks. Explosions lit up the sky like furious beacons, distracting the traitors from the true aim of the assault. Deep within the enemy's stronghold, the vanguard moved like shadows. Cloaked in darkness and armed with weapons honed by years of disciplined training, They pressed onward through winding corridors and ancient, crumbling halls. Every step was fraught with peril. Each door or passageway could conceal a deadly ambush. But driven by the memory of comrades lost and the unyielding desire to honor their sacred oath, the vanguard fought with a singular focus. Their silent advance was a testament to the belief that even in the darkest hour, a single spark of hope could ignite the flame of redemption. Back on the battlefield, the Loyalist forces clashed with the enemy in a maelstrom of fire and steel. The clash was brutal, a raw and unfiltered expression of pain and determination. Loyalist shields absorbed searing blasts, while the relentless counterattacks pushed the traitors back step by step. Amid the chaos, commanders led their units with valor, rallying their soldiers with impassioned cries for the lost glory of the Imperium. Every fallen warrior added urgency to the final gambit, a reminder that the cost of failure was unthinkable. As the battle raged on, the vanguard reached the inner sanctum of the enemy citadel. In a chamber adorned with the twisted emblems of betrayal, they encountered the warlord himself, a towering figure whose eyes burned with malignant ambition. A fierce duel erupted, the sounds of clashing blades and guttural roars mingling with the distant cacophony of war. The duel was not only a contest of martial prowess, but a symbolic struggle between the fading light of loyal unity and the corrupt darkness of rebellion. In those tense moments, the fate of the Imperium hung in a precarious balance. The Loyalists fought with every shred of their remaining strength, believing that this final gambit might yet salvage the shattered remnants of their dream. Their strategy, as audacious as it was desperate, embodied the eternal truth that sometimes victory demands the greatest of sacrifices. Every soldier, every commander, knew that failure would mean an irreversible descent into chaos, a future where the bonds of brotherhood were forever severed. As the duel reached its climax and the final assault intensified outside, the outcome of the confrontation would decide not just the fate of a single citadel, but the destiny of an entire galaxy. The final gambit was the last, desperate stroke against the overwhelming darkness, a defiant challenge to fate itself, waged in the hope that even a fractured Imperium could rise from the ashes and reclaim its long-lost unity. In the aftermath of cataclysmic battles and the slow disintegration of Brotherhood, the final reckoning of the Imperium arrived like a dark tide. On a barren world scarred by the ashes of war and illuminated only by the cold gleam of distant stars, the remnants of loyalist forces and traitor legions gathered for one last confrontation. This was not merely a clash of armies, but the culminating moment when destiny itself would be rewritten by the final act of sacrifice and despair. At the heart of this doomed world, the Imperial Palace, a once great citadel of order now reduced to a labyrinth of rubble and broken resolve, stood as the last beacon of a dying age. Its walls, battered by the relentless siege of chaos, bore witness to the cumulative weight of betrayal and shattered oaths. Here the Emperor, mortally wounded and ensnared by the dark energies he had long sought to quell, awaited the outcome of a final, desperate plan. His throne room, once resplendent with imperial grandeur, was now a somber chamber where the light of hope flickered like a dying ember. The loyalist commanders, their faces etched with both determination and grief, had rallied for one final assault. Every soldier understood that the fate of humanity hung by a thread. They carried not only weapons, but the heavy legacy of countless sacrifices. Their hearts beat with the hope that through unity, even a fractured one, a final unifying act could still be achieved. In the midst of this fervor, whispered memories of lost heroes and fallen primarchs resonated. Each life sacrificed during the long, bitter wars was a testament to an ideal that refused to die quietly. Opposing them were the traitor legions, their numbers bolstered by the echoes of rebellion and the corrupt promises of chaos. These warriors, once proud sons of the Emperor, now fought with a ruthless, desperate intensity. Their eyes burned with the arrogance of defiance and the dark allure of forbidden power. They believed that in tearing down the old order, they could forge a new destiny unburdened by ancient oaths. Their banners, stained with the blood of kin and emblazoned with twisted symbols, waved over battalions intent on extinguishing the last vestiges of loyalist hope. As the final assault began, the air itself trembled with the clash of opposing fates. Explosions rent the silence as energy weapons and bolters answered the call of war. In the maelstrom, both sides fought with the ferocity of those who had nothing left to lose. Loyalist legions, though battered and outnumbered, surged forward with a single-minded determination to reclaim the throne world. Every advance was a desperate plea to restore order, to honor the countless souls who had fallen in the pursuit of a united humanity. Amid the chaos, the Emperor's personal guard, a dwindling cadre of custodians sworn to his final command, formed a protective shield around the weakened sovereign. They moved with grim precision, their every action a ritual of duty and sacrifice. The Emperor himself, barely able to rise from his throne, gazed out upon the carnage with eyes that had seen both the zenith of glory and the abyss of treachery. His mind, steeped in ancient wisdom and marred by endless sorrow, recognized that this final confrontation was the ultimate cost of ambition, the climax of an empire undone by its own aspirations. The battle raged through the corridors of the shattered palace, echoing with the sound of clashing steel and the cries of warriors driven by both hope and hate. In one brutal melee, a loyalist commander clashed with a former brother, a duel that embodied the tragic irony of their shared past. Their blades met in sparks of fury and regret, each strike an elegy to the bonds they had once sworn to uphold. In that heart-wrenching moment, the legacy of the dying god, the Emperor, seemed poised between redemption and oblivion. As hours bled into a final, decisive moment, a surge of loyalists might broke through the enemy lines. With one final, desperate charge, the remnants of the loyal forces pressed toward the throne room. In that climactic instant, the Emperor's guardians, with unwavering resolve, sealed the fate of the traitors. The traitor legions, already weakened by internal strife and the corrosive effects of their own ambition, began to crumble beneath the weight of the renewed assault. In the ensuing silence that followed the storm of violence, the Imperium stood on the threshold of its new destiny. The final gambit had been played, and though victory came at an incalculable cost, it was a victory that bore the bittersweet taste of sacrifice. The Emperor, mortally wounded and transcending his mortal form, was interred upon the golden throne, a final act of both triumph and tragic resignation. His legacy, that of a dying god whose vision had illuminated the darkest hours, would forever serve as a beacon to those who dared to dream of unity amid chaos. Thus, as the last embers of battle faded into memory, the galaxy was left to reckon with a future written in both sorrow and hope, a future where the legacy of the dying god would echo through the ages, reminding all that even in the face of ultimate despair, the spark of redemption could one day be reborn.